All right, so we made it. And Eugene's back. I haven't seen you in a few episodes. And you brought a friend, a mutual friend, shall we say,
Please.
always with a surfboard. Hey, Steve.
Hey guys, how are you?
We're good. I think I'm
Good.
good. Anyway, I'm not sure about the other two.
Yeah, doing good, doing good.
Okay. So this is a summary of the 5 episodes, and we're going to kind of look back what we learned from talking to the guests and their companies. And some people have low battery, and some people are in an office that's 33 degrees or something ridiculous.
Even in September, it's crazy. But yes,
Even in late September.
I'll admit to that one.
Okay. And Steve, you look cool with your surfboard, so you seem to be the most.
Yeah, I'm just hanging out, Martin.
Great.
That's what podcast production is. You just never know what's going to hit you, right? And you roll with the punches.
That's right. That's right. So, okay, let's get into it. So, our first episode was with Brenda Schmidt from Redesignhealth. Redesign are pretty big, but I don't know how well they're known. So, they've been going for about 6 or 7 years. They've created 70 odd companies. Brenda started in Baxter. She did 10 years in Baxter, kind of did some of the entrepreneurial stuff that Eugene and Sarah and myself and Steve all did over the years. And then she started her first company, did that for 10 years. And then that was reasonably successful. And then she went again, did another kind of 10-year stint as founder CEO. So a lot of experience. And then with Redesign, what I thought was interesting, Sarah, was them talking about this kind of process for creating companies and how they go about the kind of the mechanics of company creation, and matching the right CEO to the right business model. I'd never kind of come across that concept before. I thought it was obviously a lot of expertise and 70 companies, a lot of companies to get going. And
Yeah.
Brenda talked a little bit about, I think, some of the realities that we've probably all faced of, having to change the founding team, even though they're great people, but that you come to a point in the journey where there's kind of a need and sort of some of the kind of challenges around that. She then picked Tesla as her great company. So, and on the face of it, and I don't know which way we're going to land on this one, right? Because here's a company that was really an innovator, a really disruptive innovator, kind of almost created the whole segment, and created this set of products that people just obsess about, and this customer loyalty and the excitement that people have. When you look at the value creation from a stock point of view, incredible. I know this year hasn't been as good as previous years, but actually the wealth generation that happened over that journey is just phenomenal. And then you think about their overall kind of alignment with environmental impact, and so that was all the good stuff. But then we got into a really interesting conversation around Elon and
The CEO behavior.
the
and
CEO behavior.
Some corporate governance challenges.
Yeah, would she have matched him to this business model? I don't know. No.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't answer that, did we? So we started to dig in a little bit about that, and it was interesting because during the podcast up to that, we were talking about how important the CEO was, so how important the CEO was to set the tone and to set the culture and the standards. And then we had this kind of anomaly of here's this amazing company, amazing entrepreneur, but very mercurial. And, some people love him, some people hate him. And there's probably a version 1, Elon's probably a version 2, right? And we got into this really interesting debate about, well, has the company gone beyond him? And kind of at what point does a company become institutionalized? And so it doesn't really matter that much about the CEO. So that we didn't actually vote on whether we thought it was a great company or not. There was also some discussion about their Glassdoor ratings and their treatment of their employees, and so hard to get underneath that objectively, right? I mean, you have little bits of data, but there are certainly some kind of issues or potential issues. So, Eugene, I think you want to come in there.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think that latter part is probably tied to the leadership, right? I mean, the culture of the company and how you treat individuals are, pretty directly tied to the leadership team. And, obviously, I've never worked for Elon, but I don't know if I want to. I just,
I'm pretty sure I don't.
I'm pretty sure I don't. To your point, I think what's the Twitter woman? I forget her name. Right? It's just kind of the talking mouthpiece more than anything else. It seems like, but I do think this whole concept of Elon, is he the right leader to take it forward? I actually think at this point there's so much competition. Sure, I'd say with Tesla they kind of created the category, for lack of a better term. Yes, there were others. But I do think that there's so much tremendous pressure that you actually do need some crazy innovative leaders to keep pushing to that next level. I don't know if now you can just say, okay, Elon, step back. This is a normally run business and incremental innovation will be okay. I don't think so. I think this is the time when the competition is kind of sliding in. So as much as I
can concur with some of what you said, of course. I think Tesla's interesting in that we will get into a debate here yet, Eugene. Just wait. But I think with you look at the start, and it takes somebody that really goes outside of the box. And the thing about Elon, every great entrepreneur is a little bit different, and he sets a goal that's, some would say is undoable, most would say is undoable,
right?
And he drives the organization to hit that goal as a whole. And I think that's where some of this comes back in. It's a challenging place to work, and so on and so forth. There's been people that have left and come back within that as well. So, it's a little bit, you get into here, we're talking about the how versus what has happened, which I know is part of the discussion here. But, from the perspective of what has been built up, it's pretty phenomenal. Because if you think the automobile industry would have electric cars today, doing it without somebody from the outside in disrupting it, I don't, that wouldn't be the case.
That wouldn't have happened.
Many have benefited. Now, Eugene has a point. What happens when a company becomes more mature? We've seen that as well, where it gets institutionalized and it loses its innovative drive. So is that Elon? Do you bring in, Microsoft has reinvented that kind of thing, and is that possible? And is that the way to go forward? I think undeniably it's a great company. The question is, where does it go from here is really the debate.
Yeah. Sarah, you were on the episode. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first, I mean, when we look at the companies that were chosen, like Tesla, it seems like most of the companies that were chosen, we'll get into the rest later. Also, each person had a sort of a personal affinity to that company. It wasn't like, I really don't like this company. I never use their product, or I have no,
right.
but like, I actually think it's a great company. So, clearly, I think Brenda liked Tesla and also probably liked what it produced. And then when you think about also the company we'll get to, thereafter with Jason, some of these companies, they all have sort of a leading persona, right? Like whether it's an Elon or Steve Jobs or something else, they all have like a leading persona attached to them that also attracts a lot of attention. And then the other part is that when you start to get the rabbit hole of the person rather than the company anymore, or if the person makes the company, genius is really highly unrelatable many times, right? And I think we can all agree that Elon kind of fits in the genius category, but that doesn't make him a good politician or somebody you want to have at a dinner party or something. He does what he does, and so it's fairly easy to criticize, genius.
Actually, I'm sorry, I would love to have him at a dinner party, but cut it off right there. So, just saying.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad.
Yeah,
it'd
but
be
you
a
get
very
the
interesting
point.
dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sometimes creates a lot of controversy around these kind of like iconic genius type figures that start, pretty incredible companies.
Yeah.
But, generally they are not the most relatable type people. It's very hard to be both of those things, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, I mean, whether or not they're a great company, clearly they have a loyal fan base. And they have a very strong persona behind the company. The legacy of the company, I think, is still TBD.
Yeah, and I think, going back to what the guys were saying about you need that certain personality to get something of such change going. What I thought was interesting about the whole show was that, with one exception, maybe, people really thought about the person first and the company second. So I think people find it hard to relate. Maybe you said this at the start, Eugene. People find it hard to relate to a company, but they find it much easier to relate to an Elon or a Steve Jobs or whatever, right? And I think the interesting thing is, I would argue that Tesla has been a great company. I think somebody said earlier about, would the existing car companies have done this on their own? And I don't believe they would. But now you're in an interesting position where you have this kind of new wave of competition coming from China. And, there's obviously lots of geopolitical stuff around that, but it's very interesting to see, who is the person, almost like Uber, was Travis the guy to keep the company going to the next level, or do you need to bring in someone new and different? And will Tesla spawn to be more than a car company? They've all sorts of ambitions to be an energy company. So what do you guys think?
Also,
are we going to give it Eugene, go on.
No, sorry. I wanted to, and just go across really all the companies. I think as anything that scales beyond, a small team, there are challenges ahead, right? Like, I think, if you look at Tesla and all the, I'll say, negative conversation, let's put Elon to the side for a second, right?
Yeah.
That, electric cars are chewing up so much energy as well, right? And you need, this much production facility, and you need to and I think part of it is just so easy and to talk about all the negatives versus those leaders that are in charge of these companies. Like, it's just the next puzzle piece to figure out, right? How do you make the next version of Tesla use up even less energy, right? Again, I'm making this up. And so I think people get into that attack mode as companies scale. And to be fair, we're also, a lot of these are US companies, and it's a very litigious society, right? And so, is it somebody's fault? I still remember the case of McDonald's being sued, I think, for hot coffee, just because you were not careful with hot coffee. Like, why are you suing McDonald's, right?
No,
so
it was the apple tart, wasn't it?
It was.
I don't know. There's so many of these. I think it was a coffee thing.
No, it was the hash brown.
Okay, whatever.
Okay, that's a new one.
People can't wait.
I have to talk to my lawyer afterwards.
Now people have to be on GLPs because they ate too many hash browns, right? But anyway, I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, that's
I think, Martin, when you now look at Tesla, then you have to, and where it is at, and Eugene's brought, I think the interesting aspect, it's now needing to reinvent itself once again because it's at its next wave.
Yeah.
And then you say, well, this is a publicly traded company. It is being institutionalized given that, and the responsibilities have changed. It's no longer private. This comes to a board of directors representing and looking out from a shareholder perspective, as well as the employees and stakeholders. Is Elon the one to take this forward, or is there somebody else we need to bring in with a very innovative mind, but maybe and can focus full time around this, as we know Elon's running multiple things.
Yeah. So your point, Steve, is around corporate governance and the lack of it.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think if you look at some companies and founders, and they're in their voting shares and how long they last into this, obviously they've driven the company forward, and people have come and they've rewarded these people very, very heavily over and over. The question now is you're going into the next wave. And, just because they started the company and made people initially successful, there is a broader stakeholder group, and that becomes the governance of the company overall.
Yeah.
And that this is where the board of directors, and I think too often, it was, I think, discussed in your podcast around Tesla, how important choosing that CEO is or having that individual. And it doesn't, that is important as private, but it's
Yeah.
just as important on the public side.
No, I agree. And I think one of the things that came up was about the time to step down. And, Brenda talked about her journey of, and when it's time to hand the reins. And I suppose that's a TBD. I think the other thing that came up, Sarah, was around kind of the fungibility of talent, right? That the system, the company was so well organized now that really talent was incredibly fungible, which I thought was a very interesting idea too.
I think the next season, guys, we should discuss Redesignhealth as a company. I find it just fascinating, by the way.
Yeah.
Just a side note.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with
I love
Eugene's
that. Yeah.
comment around that. The fact of going out and looking at problems.
Yeah.
And then really
The company factory, right?
but
that makes my job easy, trying not to have to get new guests.
But I'm still curious. I'm still really curious because it all comes back to people.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, asked around this, how do you really instill that passion deep enough to go through some of the low lows? If you look at you haven't brought up Amazon as a great company, but that wasn't profitable for a long time.
Yeah.
That Bezos had to pull that through.
That's right.
And there's quite some lows.
Yeah,
and
we did actually touch on that a little bit in the episode with Brenda about Bezos and Amazon and how just that focus, that maniacal focus on the customer and customer obsession was the kind of energy that was needed to bring the team through the hard times,
But I think the true entrepreneurs and the companies that make it through are just that. They're looking at a problem and a need, and they're going really, really deep with the passion to make sure it's right, to be able to succeed. And they don't line up all these pieces and say, okay, let's go now.
Right.
They're just ultra focused in on, and each one is a different character with their own style. But I think what comes together is that focus, and then that passion of, I'm going to solve this problem. It's, I'm going to bring it together and solve the need and problem with tenacity, perseverance. Nothing's in my way. I'm going.
Yeah. Okay, look, I think we've talked good depth on that one. We're half an hour in, and we're going to have to speed up a little bit. So I'll hand over to my co-host Sarah to take us through the next episodes.
Yeah, one of our next episodes we had on as a guest Jason Foster, who is the current CEO of Oribiotech. And he's a fellow American expat living in London, living abroad. He had also quite a fascinating journey to get there after, working similar to us in his, I was in all of us back in our CVs, sort of larger company, and then and left after a number of years, and then basically advised several companies before he finally doubled down and said, "Nay, Ori's the one I want to really take forward." But his company, so anyway, if anyone wants to watch that episode, which I would highly recommend, because we also have a lot of humor on that one around his Whoop wearable. But click here.
Humor has to be part of it for sure.
Yeah, I can't do a podcast without humor. But so, and I have to say, he took it super well for we didn't really even know each other, and I just dove in on him. He wasn't insulted, so that made me really like Jason even more. So he did Apple, which, on the loyal fan base question, I think, yeah, some people have come and go, but generally, is it that they're really delighting customers still, or is it that there's still this idea of switching costs that people just don't want to switch and they're used to something?
Yeah.
That's, I think, something that we can talk about. They still have pretty high employee ratings in the US anyway,
They
4
do, yeah.
stars out of 5.
Yeah.
Solid market cap, and not much about them really, that we discussed anyway in the podcast on the environmental and social impact side. So curious, Eugene and Steve, any comments that you guys have on Apple? Like, we can even start with, do you really feel like they're still delighting customers, or do you feel like it's a switching cost issue?
For me, I still enjoy the heck out of my iPhone and my Mac devices. I mean, other glitch here and there for sure, but I think it just, I don't know, I guess learned to kind of expect it, but I'm delighted. The only thing that I hate about this device is my health kit data is taking up like gigabytes upon gigabytes, and I don't know what to do about it. So if Tim Cook is watching,
Well, we've
please,
got a
please,
Tim
help me.
Cook, so we'll
Please.
sort that, don't worry.
But having said that, that's probably the lock-in, to upgrade to the next one, you're taking up more and more space.
Is that due to your 2 workouts a day, Eugene?
It's my it's also the sweltering, heat in here that's generating even more
That's
data
the
points.
midday sauna, I think, right?
Midday sauna.
Exactly.
But no, what are you doing with those gigabytes of data is my question. Like, what's the value of those gigabytes of data? What are you using it for?
It's a little bit of FOMO. Like I used to have 17 devices back in the day on me and generating it, and I found.
By the way,
also,
that's true. That is a true fact.
Yeah.
I can verify that.
That's not exaggerated.
I think
No.
I think Manish was the only one. Shout out to Juneja. Yeah, Manish Juneja just had everything around him. I could never compete. But I think this is an episode of its own. I do think, we as human beings, like at least for myself, I need data in order to improve upon. Having said that, there's been so many sources of this data for so many years now, and I just don't know how to purge it, to be frank. Having said that, I'm starting to load a lot of this stuff into my ChatGPT private one to play with it. So.
Okay, but apart from the stuff you're using today, have they continued to innovate? I mean, when was there a new product that delighted you? I mean, these are all pretty old products.
It's interesting. My girls just kind of mentioned the other, like, you used to be kind of like a geek and play with new technology, and I'm like, I'm happy with my 12. I think I don't even know what version this is.
Okay.
Like, really? So I just use it as a utility more than anything else. It's like turning on the water, right? And I just don't expect them to give me anything more, to be frank. So,
but do you need more? Because the function, I mean,
I want less.
I mean, you
want
are,
less.
yeah.
But
you're an above average user, let's be honest. So you take an average user, and do you need more? I mean, to your point, you turn it on and it's working, right? That's so it's brought consistency, and it's nice.
Isn't that the definition, Steve, of when, like, you didn't know you needed one of these, like an iPhone, you didn't know you needed one of these. What Apple has always done is create these new categories that we didn't even know we needed them, to the point where we can't live without them.
Right.
And I think Sarah's question is, are they continuing to do that, or are they just?
But I think the aspect is, so it is a hardware platform, and they've been developing the whole service side. Now the element is, Eugene brought up data. What have they done with data as a company?
Yeah.
But that's actually their stance. This is why I have 10 gigabytes on here, is that this is mine, right? And it's not in their cloud, and they're not analyzing it. And you give up, in other cases, you give up the privacy for.
What can they do with that for you, is what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So therein lies one of their probably biggest unturned stone as a company. And can they, because they have fundamentally in their DNA grown up as a hardware company.
Except for that right now, my battery's not charging, so. I think we
You're not
were
delighted.
like simpler things like
These specific problems, I think we need to go a little.
I love this MacBook Air. Why is it not charging? I was like, all the sockets go out of my house this morning. What happened here? But no, it's just not charging. So it's, TBD if we make it through this podcast. And I did read on Reddit that it could be that there's some application on my laptop, that this MacBook, that's taking up too much something. And that once it goes down to less than 90%, it actually starts to charge, and somehow it's saving battery. Now, if that happens in this podcast, I will interrupt everyone to say that that's happening, because I'll be super impressed. But my guess right now is that I'm at some point going to just cut off. That's what I think is going to happen.
Okay.
Does that mean we need to speed up on all of this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But actually on Apple, just a quick question for you guys, as far as the innovation, and I would call it a peripheral innovation as a hardware company. I don't know how many of you guys have AirTags.
Yeah. And it's been super helpful.
And unfortunately, it actually, I think, causes more stress for people, because I know it's in all of our suitcases, and when we kind of get off at the airport, we start looking at it. Before, I was fine, like it either shows up or it doesn't, right? So now it's like, it's here, great.
But there is interference. Like, do note this, because I had this just happen. So the AirTag I love, because I'm always losing my wallet. I don't know why, but like now that you can pay with your phone, I sometimes don't even look at my wallet for days, and then I'm like, oh crap, where is that? I need my ID and I can't find it. And with the AirTag, I find it. We were just on holiday in Portugal in the summer, and it told me, I couldn't find it again because I hadn't used it for days. And it told me that it was in a parking lot an hour away. So I had a panic attack, like, oh my God, it's gone. It's gone. Like that can't be in the parking lot anymore. And somebody turned it off. It said like, it hasn't been seen since last night, 10 p.m. It's in a parking lot. So I like race out to the car. I'm like, I gotta go. My husband's like, where are you going? I'll tell you later. Just going. And I'm like, I get into the rental car. I look next to me, and it's in between the seats. It's sitting right there. So also with the AirTag, there can be in I think cars that have a lot of electronics anyway, there's interference with the AirTag. So it's not always correct about where it actually is, just as a side note. But having said that, I would never take it out of my wallet or my laptop bag or something like that, because it does I've used it a bunch already to find things.
Okay. So we seem to be stuck in use cases, which I think shows that Apple is important in your lives.
I think we need Apple. Yeah.
But is it like, back to the question, are they still innovating? The Vision Pro was the last thing I remember that they really innovative, and I don't know whether that's gonna hit the mark or not. So
I think one of the aspects now is you have a lot of pieces of things, and yes, they work together. But how does this all come together to be maybe more even into your lifestyle, predictive, in supporting the elements? And this I think there's room for innovation around how all this data they're sitting on is used more to move up the whole hardware platform at this point in time. That would be my thesis or hypothesis for them. And is Tim Cook going to really jump on that and do that, or is that up to a next leader to make that happen?
Okay.
I think it's
Thanks
the next
to
leader
Steve for bringing it sensible. Yeah.
Okay. So Steve landed that one. So in very diplomatic terms,
soft landing. Very soft landing.
What a nice soft landing. That there's a huge opportunity, but whether they're actually capturing it as they would have done previously is the question, and whether Tim Cook is actually capturing that as the big one.
Yeah.
All right. Right, we'll come back at the end and we'll rate the four.
Yeah, because I was going to take us back out on it, but I'll pause.
Yeah. Let's keep going, because Sarah's battery is going to go. So the next episode is with Andrew Murphy. I think you guys know Andrew. He was he talked about his story of Sláinte, which is the company that he started 2006, and he started it almost as a bet, or to prove to one of his MBA classmates that it could be done, and then told us how he managed to he said raid his wife's savings. I'm not sure what that meant, but it sounded like it was some personal risk involved for the whole family. And talked about, yeah, and 10 years, and what I thought was interesting, after 10 years, he had the company lined up to IPO in Australia. And, it was almost like that was the part of the story I'd always heard. I hadn't really understood how long he had been doing it himself. And Sarah, you were asking him, at what point did you bring in a kind of senior leader? And that was certainly years into the journey. And that was a CTO, so he had spent the time. He talked about going to client meetings, and he had a really compelling business case to save money for health systems. And it was around the time of the financial crash in Ireland when the IMF had come in. And so there was a lot of pressure to save money. And he said it didn't matter. He said, even with that massive business case, it was still, he'd go to meetings, there'd be 26 people from the client at the meeting, and they'd all be arguing about other stuff, not about like how to save money. But he talked about having to, literally get into the customer site, sit with them, and figure out, all the different stakeholders across the health system, what each one of them needed. And he learned pretty quickly not to go in and tell them that their baby was ugly, because that didn't really work. He had to go in and kind of tell them how great their system was. And after about an hour, they would then tell him all the problems, and he would start to work meticulously across each of the stakeholders to figure out what the message was for each one, and kind of crafted that value prop per stakeholder. And then he went through that whole journey. And at the end, basically the company was taken away from him. And he said, he created this rookie mistake kind of at the start when he'd set up the shareholder agreement. And that was literally taken away from him. And he resisted the kind of desire to do a 2.0 version. He left. And kind of what I thought was amazing was the bounce back, and ends up starting a company, advising a bunch of companies, joining a private equity firm as a partner. He couldn't remember how many boards he was on. I think he said 13 in the end, but and having worked with Andrew for about 8 years, I know he's pretty hands-on when he gets involved. So he told us his journey, and then his company was maybe one a lot of people don't know. It's the DCC Limited, which is probably best described as an Irish Berkshire Hathaway. They've been around for about 50 years, so that not as old as Apple or around the same, older than Tesla, I guess, but maybe not as old as Berkshire or some of the other ones we've talked about over the time. And started as a VC venture capitalist, and then morphed into this kind of holding company that really just exudes kind of financial discipline, and talked about the way that they enforce that discipline in terms of getting into companies, getting into industries. And if you look at their financial performance over the last 50 years, it's quite outstanding. They were operating in healthcare, in energy, and in technology. They were in kind of building, and they'd got out of that just before the kind of the crash in 2008. And a bit like your example, Sarah, of Berkshire, talked about the lack of ego, and talked about a lot of people want to have heard of this. They're an Irish company. A lot of people here don't even know them. But they've just been steadily performing, and there is an amazing founder behind it, Jim Flavin, but you don't hear about this guy as much. It's not like a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk. It's kind of behind the scenes, not a massive ego. So that was the third company that our guest picked. So yeah, I'll stop there.
And what was your guys' rating? Because I'm not familiar with it as well. It almost sounds like just a holding company, right? And the skills that are required to do that as a founder are very different, right, than a brand. And I'm assuming the DCC then operates, or all the brands operate with their own branding, and it's just a holding. What was your guys' rating on it? What did you come out?
I don't think we ever rated any of them in the
No.
end, did we?
They,
We
they're,
didn't score
Just
them,
sort
no.
of
they're
discussed.
looking for you to do that, Eugene.
Well, we're not doing like the thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, that's-
don't give
so-
him that much control, Steve.
Oh.
Yeah.
Shit.
So
No,
it-
I mean, I think we were sort of thumbs up about DCCC. Like,
well,
I mean,
the thing, an observation here. I mean, Eugene said it. It's a very different company than I think the others you've put that have been put forward as great companies.
Yeah.
It does have a brand, and that the brand is, do people want to take your money? Yes or no? Are you somebody we want to work with?
Yeah.
That would be Berkshire, as a whole. I think listening to you, Martin, one of the things about this, and one of the things about any great company is it takes time, and that it doesn't happen overnight. And I think in each of those journeys or stories, you're going to really hear the dips. And I think, well, maybe people haven't really heard about the company, but consistency has been quite high, as a whole in what it has done. I think I haven't gone into what their financial status is, but I'm sure they've returned well for shareholders. They've probably created all new supply chains and employed, many, many, many people in that process as a whole. And they're consistent as a machine and just keep going. And I think probably listening to you about DCC that comes in is a lot of people talk about the value of people, but to be that consistent for that long, they must do something right with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair.
yeah. Yeah, it was a similar company to the Berkshire example that we gave, and they're very different, obviously, than the Apple and the Tesla examples that we discussed as well. So yeah, it's not like there was I didn't feel, Martin, I don't know, but coming out of this, it was more that there was almost like an identification with each person with the company that they chose. There's reasons personally that somebody identified with that company and then chose that company, rather than there was this common thread through all the companies about why they were so great. I mean, there are companies obviously that people don't like generally and publicly may have a bad rep. And so those are easy not to categorize as great companies, or easier.
Yeah.
But then with higher performing companies,
But
it seems like people just put up the ones that they have a personal connection to, which is quite interesting.
well, it's interesting because in some respects, that's back to the Berkshire model, in which you have very strong leaders and you leave them alone.
Yeah.
And DCC are, sorry, couldn't actually. DCC are a little bit more hands-on, so they're when Sarah represented Berkshire, she was very kind of, as you said there, that they picked the leaders, and that's kind of it, and they put a lot of work into that, but they're not kind of rolling their sleeve up when they're getting involved. Whereas with DCC, they are. I mean, it's pure.
So there's more entrepreneurialism, it sounds like, in the DCC model.
I'm not sure if it's entrepreneurialism. I think it's discipline and operational exercise, right? It's like kind of classic PE of, okay, let's use financial leverage, but also let's operationally get this thing in shape. And it's that discipline of getting the financial base right, but also getting the operational base right.
So
I think that distinguishes the operations, right? Because Berkshire has tons of discipline as well. That's why people stick with them, but it's not necessarily the same. I mean, they look for certain things to be in place and to be done well, rather than, I think, the DCCC approach. But so maybe that's the operational differences there. But in any case, I think they're very similar in they have clear definition of what they look for, right? And then what their capability is and what they bring to the table, both of them. They're just more humble in that, rather than an Elon Jobs approach. And
well, they have stood the test of time. If they're 50 years, it's not nothing. And still going strong and still innovating or working with innovators. But it seems, Sarah, you made the comment that there's a personal connection. That's where I was moving towards entrepreneurialism. that it's a little bit, we want to partner. So they use more of the partnering approach, probably over a Berkshire. And there's probably size and scale in this and difference as well, as a whole.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things I would bring in is their time, their consistency. Sometimes boring is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And then it also brings the co-founder
Exactly.
thing is something we touched on too, right, Martin? We talked about, a lonely founder versus co-founders and
Yeah.
partners there. Yeah, and I think Berkshire has, that you kind of had a lead face, right? There was always, one face that was bigger than the other, but you couldn't do that partnership still. We talked about that in one of the recent Berkshire shareholders meetings when Buffett forgot that Charlie wasn't next to him, and it was like on recording. Like, hey, oh wait, he's gone.
Yeah, it's quite.
And so that also came up as just another theme to bring up in terms of the company. This idea, like I think he, even with Jobs and others, he became the face, but over time you got to know kind of the people that were the right hands. With Elon, I think that's been much harder for people to figure out.
Yeah.
Unless I just haven't been keeping up with it. But
yeah, I think that's right. Okay, look, we'll move on to the last one, and then we'll come back. We'll circle back to see what the common threads, if there are any. So last but not least was Bobby Voicu. And Sarah, you want to run with this?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. So Bobby Voicu is currently the CEO of Mixrift. But going into that one was completely like no gaming
Was
expertise.
teaching both of us about games.
We were like, okay. No idea what this space was really about. Not a gamer myself, that type of thing. And so really listening to him and his journey. And I loved how he said, when I kind of joked with him, like, hey, your first entrepreneurial experience, it sounds like it was sort of black market. And he was like, yeah, but where I was, there was no other colors in that market. Like, the whole thing was black. I didn't have a choice. Everything we did in that time was black market entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
So, I mean, his journey was just fascinating. So again, encourage listeners to double click on that episode and have a listen to Bobby, who's highly entertaining. And he picked King as his company, which is also a company I had no idea about. But they have 240 million monthly players. I'm not sure how many of those, are repeat, but it's solid traction. They're now part of Microsoft. They also had really strong employee ratings at one point. And I made a joke in that discussion with him about when I was starting to listen to how many people were gaming and the numbers of the market size, et cetera. I thought, oh my God, have you ever looked at this at a demographic perspective? I mean, is the GDP of high gaming countries going down, or has anyone looked at I'd like to say, like, are people just stuck on games all day and like nobody's doing anything productive? So I did make that a joke in the podcast itself, but following up on that, before we got here today, I also thought I really would wonder to look at how gaming is viewed in terms of societal impact versus social media, which is also getting a ton of negative press and Surgeon General warnings now. And funny enough, I found two scientific articles, one in Science Direct and one in JAMA Pediatrics, that both argue that gaming actually does not have the same negative impacts as social media does. It doesn't cause depression. It doesn't cause this sort of personal image comparison. So there's no consensus on the definition really of this yet, like the impacts of this. But there's publication coming out. And interestingly, gaming is seen as being a more positive and supportive community as a building tool, let's say, for interaction, as opposed to social media. So I'll turn it over to Steve and Eugene for you guys to comment on there, but not sure how big into gaming either of you are.
Well, I'm not a big gamer. I'll start there.
Okay, so 4 experts.
Yeah, more experts in the room. Great.
Yeah. I'm aware of the space and also how it's been moved into health to some degree in some of the DTX that we're all aware of and so on and so forth. And, I think one of the questions of gaming for me is this, you brought it into the social media side. yeah, how does this impact social communication? Would be a question that comes out when we discuss what that means. I think it's interesting you did some research to say, well, there hasn't been any scientific proven theory that it creates mental illness on that basis. On the other hand, there's certain skills that it also enhances for these people. So, but gaming as a whole, I think there's been a stigma around it that it's only for fun or entertainment. But if you look at the attention it can draw in, or what it does as a whole from a platform perspective, a technology aspect, that becomes quite interesting.
Yeah. And, I think it's worth talk about NEN, right? In terms of
Sure.
the thesis behind NEN.
No, absolutely. I think, that's when I was raising it, that's a specific example where you're using gaming for children, for pediatrics, to be able to understand the pain thresholds and then take away anxiety. So I think that, there's positive attributes in what gaming is bringing beyond pure entertainment. And I think it's just, they've had a stigma that this can only be used for fun. I think it's also being used in educational and productivity aspects within the workplace. And it goes from there. And if you look at 240 million was the number I heard of monthly gamers.
Yeah.
This is massive,
Yeah.
it's that kind of engagement is huge. And how do you funnel that into other things with that engagement and yeah, they must be delighting customers.
Yeah. What do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, I mean, the question is, and I think it's always, what's the product being used for? And just like with any addiction, right? And to Sarah's comments on a couple of studies that she found, if you torture data long enough, it'll confess to anything. It's one of my, favorite statements. And it's not mine. I read it on Twitter ages ago.
Is
but
that why?
and it
Is
just
that why
resonated.
Is that why you dump so much data to me? You give me
Of
the
course,
confess
Steve.
to anything.
You just torture it, and it'll confess to whatever we guide it to.
Maybe you
Right?
want to,
But the reality is, like, and I just had to look it up. Like, I wasn't familiar with King either. But like Candy Crush, I'm sure it relaxes some people, but I'm sure others are addicted to it, just like almost, with anything else, right? To whether it's NEN, Akili, many others. Actually just spoke to a company that was doing kind of like a farm kind of game. They're looking at health and well-being and working with, healthcare system because they got a high usage. So I think, any single asset, whether it's game out there or anything you do can be turned into a great thing or into an evil thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's boundaries that need to be put in place. And then, this goes back into the leadership and what their goal is and, what's the impact they want to leave behind, right? There's this thing I was just talking to somebody in not my direct family, but an extended family. They sit there and watch Twitch all day. Have you guys heard of Twitch? It's watching other gamers game. And I'm like, okay, that makes zero sense to me, but I fine, right? And I'm like, why don't you always create or at least play the game and stream it, right? So it's fascinating. There's always two consumers of it, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a great point, Sarah. I mean, I'd never kind of had that negative association. I always thought of games for good. But yeah, there is definitely a stigma associated with it, which probably creates this funny kind of view of the space.
Well, I also thought, like, does that say something about, humanity, that we're okay with comparing ourselves to other on performance? Like, we're okay if we suck at something compared to somebody else, but we're not okay if we don't look as good as the other person, apparently. Because if gaming doesn't bother you to be compared, I mean, it is you are competing, right?
Yeah.
So we're used to competing all the time, I guess, when you're young in the classroom or in sports or, I don't know, in piano, I don't know what else. Everyone's used to that sort of comparative competition, but they're not used to, I guess, more overt feelings, or one of the studies said it's more of like an echo chamber of if you thought lower of yourself or something like that, then social media sort of validates it, and it becomes like an echo chamber that reinforces it, as opposed to gaming, which is just like, oh well, I lost.
But see, but that's interesting. That's for you. Oh well, that's for you. Oh well, I lost, right? But there,
I guess. I mean, but
people that go to therapy for gaming.
Yeah,
right, as an addiction.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, and so that's really where I guess we'd have to really look into every study, as you say, you know. But you know, JAMA Pediatrics seemed to be a pretty decent one to publish on this. So I was honestly surprised that there wasn't a more negativity around gaming in its impact on people. But
well, Steve, if you remember, and Sarah, I don't remember if you were in Amsterdam, but I forget the woman's name out of Amsterdam University. She was running Games for Health.
Yeah,
Amsterdam back in the day, right? That kind of, you know, that was sort of the initiation of that movement, I would say almost a decade plus ago. So so again, right, that's the positive aspect of it, as in a treatment, or, you know, and then there's, you know, I'm sure if you play 20 hours a day a killing game of some sort, that I can't imagine that that's going to be good for you.
And that's NEN too, just to kind of circle back on that, you know, full disclosure, definitely an investor and associated with NEN, but that's a company that's, you know, working with gamification for a good purpose, right? Is to say, you know, how do we help children that are going through oncological treatment, you know, handle their pain? And if gamification can be used and games for health can be used to help people in a good way, right? Then I guess there is the upside, whereas I guess social media doesn't have that angle yet. Like, how has it been used for a good way? I'm not sure people have made that argument quite yet.
Yeah, what I took away from Bobby's session was just a lot of fun. You know, like how both the process of creating the company and the process of playing the game just generate a lot of fun, you know. So I think that was something that we hadn't heard with the other companies, but I thought it was super interesting. And yeah, sure, you know, so maybe gaming has an addictive quality, but you know, that's probably part of it, but also there's a lot of beneficial attributes and there's also a lot of fun. I thought the other thing that was very interesting was the reason he picked King was the model had been very much a hits driven business, you know, like a movie, you're kind of finding the next big blockbuster game. And the way he kind of positioned King was they had figured out a whole new business model and a whole new approach around building a platform and building a process whereby, you know, you can create enough runway to then generate, almost like Motown, for those of you who are into soul music, where they created a whole factory of creating hits. You know, it wasn't just once off, it wasn't just a creative process, it was a actual system they created, and King did that. Games and
the question on that is, can you be consistent over how many years with that model?
Right.
Not that it isn't interesting and they haven't been successful to take anything away.
Yeah. So I think they're like around 20 years old company. So, but they're part of Microsoft now. So yeah, they've big supporters behind them. All right, guys. So let's try to circle back then in the couple of minutes we have left. Sarah seamlessly moved from her battery plagued laptop to her iPhone. So if we were to look back at that, look at the four companies we've talked about, what do you take away as kind of the key lesson in terms of like what is a great company or how to build one? If you were to try to pick one idea.
One? We're only
let's start with one. If
I
already have one. So.
and can we put it in a sentence? Or
yeah. Words would be good. Yeah, sentence structure. Yes.
I think the common theme is people, and that is always said. But the aspect is really about the people that started out, and then the people you can attract around it. And I'm sorry, Martin, but I'm going to add a second attribute in here and cheat. And too often we want to predict, oh, this is a great company. It's going to hit like that. If it's truly new and unique and solving a deep, big problem, it just takes time.
Yeah.
And I want to see the predictions after 10 years and how correct they really are or aren't at that stage, you know, from that basis. And so it's perseverance, people with perseverance. And each one of them is different. You can't put them in one box with character, personality, 100%. They're all different.
But there's certain common traits, right?
Yes.
So persistent, you mentioned.
Yeah, I think it is. It's the common trait is they're most interested in really solving the problem.
Yeah.
How they go about it, you know, it varies and differs.
Yeah.
But the common thread, the most common thread is very, very deep. It's not, oh, wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah.
No, it's not, wouldn't it be nice? No, I'm out to solve this. This is going to happen.
I'm not going to sleep till this is solved.
And
Yeah,
that's the passion.
yeah.
And they get knocked down, and they get back up.
Brenda brought that up really well, because we were asking her about that company creation process. And she was explaining they have a team of kind of analysts, kind of folks, kind of Wall Street or, you know, management consulting backgrounds who kind of do these landscapes to say, like, here are the problem areas. Like, you know, you take insurance or you take health systems, whatever. And they create this map, and then they do all this due diligence, and they continue to focus on the problem. And then they recruit in and they kind of hypothesize around the solution and say, maybe this is the solution and here's what the business model might look like. And then they recruit in founders and CEOs. And I was kind of interested of like, how do you do that? Because, you know, it's almost like trying to match, you know, the founder needs to really be passionate about what they're doing. How are you matching them up? And she was saying it's really simple. It's not the people who focus on the solution. It's the people who are really obsessed with solving these problems. You know, whether they tried it before and they were successful or not, but because the solution is probably going to change. And you don't want somebody who's fixated on that, who has the mental agility to say, okay, well, maybe we'll use a screwdriver rather than a hammer for this. But I really want to make sure we get this picture on the wall, or whatever the right analogy is. Okay, so that's cool, Steve. So the right personality focused on the specific problem, and the ability to track others around it. That's your number one pick, is that?
Oh, I can backtrack. Were we asking for Steve to
confirm that I wasn't?
confirm, check.
Please check, Eugene. Let's not debate this. But I mean, Eugene, you're right in the midst of this. We didn't even bring. Maybe you brought that up in a private episode or whatever else. But you're right in the midst of this whole aspect.
I was gonna tag on to it, just, you know, being conscious of time as well. But I think, you know, I saw somebody post, well, you know, holidays are over kind of thing, right? And it's back to work and, you know, all those challenges and, you know, the head goes. And I think, you know, back to the people and the talent and the passion of all this, to me, it's not about work, right? You got to be enjoying and curious to be solving the problem. Like, there's always going to be shit that hits you, right? Like, again, pick any of these companies and they're always, you know, they're struggling with this or this, you know, lobbyist or this lawsuit or this whatever. But those are challenges and puzzle pieces that you got to just enjoy solving, right? So back to kind of Marty's comment a bit on Redesignhealth, you got to have curious people that want to solve in the space generally, right? And ultimately help people. I'm going to actually tack on, you know, I'll pick the one word on this and just extracting it is focus, right? Because I think focus, you know, if we rewind back, you know, Tesla set out and with a focus on electric vehicle and being the best, right? In the earliest. Yeah. I'm going to jump to Candy Crush. That was their, you know, I looked it up. That was they maniacally focused on that and as the game and the market. Sure, you expand later. You know, I don't know much about DCC, but it sounds like their focus is the financial prescription, for lack of a better term, to all the portfolio companies. That's their focus. That's what they do great, right? So I think it's really focusing, and just that's kind of the summary that I would go through the 4 or 5 companies, right?
Okay, super. And we give the last word to Sarah.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was a bit more, I guess, tactical approach to it. But what I saw is that when you had companies that are less connected to an end consumer, then reputation and performance was really what stood out to me. As to if I'm evaluating Berkshire Hathaway and I don't even care, I'm just a person that has nothing to do with that company. All I look to is the news, and I look at reputation value and think, oh, they must be a pretty good company. Must be doing a good job. And why do they make the news? And are they in good performance? So it's sort of like reputation and performance from things that are less consumer facing, let's put it that way, where to me, kind of how people seem to link on to good and great around a company.
Yeah.
And then if there was a consumer or an end user connection, more of an everyday consumer level, then it really had to deliver some sort of personal value and connection to the consumer, which is why you see people pick Apple, or you see people pick Tesla, and maybe care a little bit less about the personas and all the drama that happens around the persona over time. But do they feel that they're actually getting value from that brand? Are you delivering something for me that I really feel is valuable and connected to? And then if you are, to me, you become a great company, and your company I throw out there. And that also I think that holds true also for the gaming companies that we talked about. So yeah, it was more like a B2B versus a B2C kind of split on how I think an average person looks at and starts to say whether you think that company is great or not, because we can't all be connected to these companies as well, right? So how do we assess them from a distance?
Yeah, I think that's a great.
Though maybe, sorry, I don't necessarily disagree with you, because I think branding is built. I don't know about the B2B, B2C, because you ultimately have the customers, right? And you have to delight those customers, whether it's B2B or B2C. And I do believe that building a brand on B2B, while absolutely less important than the direct to consumer, I think the quality, the trust that people, your buyers, ultimately need to be delighted with it. And again, I throw it out there with a shameless promo of a white label coaching solution, right? It needs to have good quality. It needs to have good trust. You need to continue building that brand, even if it's Intel inside, right? So,
But that to me is performance, right? That's why I said it. It's like reputation and performance.
Yeah.
You just got to deliver. Fair. If you're the B2B2C, you got to deliver, right? And you got to have good numbers, good performance, I think. And sure, I think in your case, Eugene, you have to also be differentiated, the human connection you bring with your health coach versus just digital apps, right? Anyone can get a prompt. Half people don't use them. Right. So you bring a differentiated approach in whether you're white labeled or you're going direct, right? There's value there. So yeah.
I'm super impressed.
That's my plug for you, by the way. You see how I wove that in? Come on, guys.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Both channels were brought in.
I love how Eugene got that in at the end.
Yes.
Hey, listen,
a while.
People usually watch the beginning of the podcast and the end.
Yeah,
so,
I know your timing
the middle is kind of skipped.
Your timing is exquisite. Is that right? So that was a lot of fun, and the whole process was a lot of fun. And we're gonna see how we go and decide if we're going to do a series 2 or not, based on public response, if there is any. But maybe one angle that might be worth considering is what you guys said at the start about the process of company creation, so whether it's Redesignhealth or some of the other studios, really digging into that and trying to understand, how do you go from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10? And the art and the process of company creation might be an interesting thing to engage some of the venture studios, whether it's in healthcare or beyond that. So
I think that'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Contrast that with think solo or team entrepreneurs, because I do think the processes, while similar, are very different. And I think that'd be the fun thing. That
might be a nice comparison. Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Very much.
Yep.
And
Always.
I'm
Pleasure.
glad to see you, Eugene is still in form and hasn't, melted away.
Melted.
That's right, that's right. He's lost about
I
5
mean,
pounds.
I was gonna say, I was gonna do it in kilos. Thank you, Marty. Yes,
Kilos for American audience.
international
But you're collecting the data on it, so that's good.
I am. I'm gonna step on that scale when I come home for sure.